Welcome to another episode of Talking Metaverse presented by Immersal. I'm Tan. I'm here with Matthias Koski, who is the head of global sales at Immersal.
Hello. Yeah, very well. Living the dream.
Living the dream. All right. And our guest today is Mr. Terry XR Schussler. He's a senior director at Deutsche Telekom. Okay, so Terry, you're the Senior Director, XR and Metaverse Division. So can you tell us a little bit about what does that involve? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, I mean, to get context, I'll give you the really quick background on my journey to get there. So first the Earth cooled, then the dinosaurs came. No, that's not the quick journey. Sorry. Let me give you the short one.
If the Earth didn't cool, you wouldn't be here. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been doing software development since I taught myself how to program computers at the age of 12. I won't tell you how many years ago it was, but a few decades. So I've done a lot of consumer products, a lot of technology-based software. My vision has always been about how to utilize advancing technologies to enable better human-to-human communications. And my journey led me through to join Deutsche Telekom in 2016, where I started focusing on B2B innovation using cutting-edge immersive technologies. But that quickly transitioned to my desire to make it possible for us to transform the human experience from focusing on the mobile phone as the centerpiece of all interaction models to head-worn devices. So I've been kind of trying to bring the company forward on that journey. And in the course of that enabled me to sort of focus on both the network side of things, 5G, edge computing, the middleware stack, enabling the user experiences, and then the actual end devices and the technologies to enable the devices to be more performant, smaller, more human-centric in their function and their experience. So that made me sort of become the de facto AR glasses guy at the company several years ago. And I had kind of described my role as focusing on spatial computing, but I think because of the vernacular of the word metaverse becoming so important to everybody, it just became natural. So I changed it to be XR and metaverse, just to make it clear to people the relationship that I had in the company to the technology and the use cases and stuff like that. So generally, I focus on the technical side of things, all the whole end-to-end pipeline from the network core all the way right up to the very edge of the sensor on the device. And looking at ways that we can grow the value to the developer ecosystem, to our customers, both the enterprise and consumer customers, and to the ecosystem at large. And I do a lot of work with large strategic partners as well as innovation partners to try to further that vision.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Matthias.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, what is now the most hottest topic around metaverse? Kind of what kind of exciting things you're now working on?
Well, I think there's still a journey where we're trying to understand what metaverse means, what it is. In 2020, you had collaboration software. In 2021, metaverse. In 2020, you had a social website. In 2021, it's called a metaverse. In 2020, you had a shopping site where you could go and shop with your friends, and now it's a metaverse, and so on. So everything's been pivoted and rebranded as metaverse, which creates tons of confusion and lack of clarity about what the heck is a metaverse or the metaverse. So actually earlier this year, in working on a internal briefing for our senior executives on the advancing of XR and metaverse technologies and trying to click clarity on what things are, what does Web3 really represent, things like that. My key focus was and has always been to try to create commonality and understanding about certain things. And so I started with the word metaverse. One of the things that was driving me crazy late last year was the fact that it was being used as a singular and a plural at the same time. Really hard to create clarity for people when you are you talking about all the metaverses, that metaverse, the metaverse, So I started with the simplistic approach where I said, the word metaverse with a capital M represents the singularity, the container of all others. There's only one of those, and it's not an object or a thing that anyone owns or anything. It's just it's a concept. And then the lowercase metaverse is simply an experience that a company or a person has built or a group has built and made available to be used by themselves, by others, whatever. And it's inside the collective, right? So I think that really simple definition. And then by definition, what is the lowercase metaverse is really just a sort of multi-person 3D user experience. Does not need to be on a head-worn device. Would be better and more ideal if it was, but could work on a mobile phone or any other flat display. So I think that interesting point of contention for some people, right? Because a lot of people say, well, if it's 3D, it's got to be on head-worn. Otherwise, it's not really a metaverse. So I've been more recently referring to that as the immersive metaverse, to say that that experience is a version of a metaverse that's differentiated by its level of immersion. Whether you get immersion in the sense of multimodal input, you know, my eyes, my mouth speaking, my hands moving, my body as an interaction device drives the user experience. And I also could get haptic feedback, you know, another sort of input, spatial audio, and other experiences, visual and other, that make the experience feel more immersive. I feel more digitally present in it. And so that's been really the key thing that I think has started a clear journey within Deutsche Telekom about, okay, if we agree on this definition for the time being, it may evolve, just like the word internet evolved. But we could at least put a stake in the ground for the year and say, okay, this is our definition. And then how do we move forward based on that and have commonality of language when we're talking about a metaverse versus the metaverse.
That is so
and now when we have now like when we have defined the metaverse world, like how telcos will make money out of that?
So so we look at this as a full end-to-end experience. So we look at all the places where we can bring value, and of course, you know, make business, right? So there's both aspects to it. So, you know, on the core of the network, you know, it's not just about 5G. 5G is the current, you know, wireless cellular technology standard, but, you know, it'll be 6G in the near future and so on. It's going to evolve. But there's also edge computing. There's also fixed line connectivity. And there's satellite. There's other types of connectivity, right? So we look generically at the vehicle of connectivity and figure out ways that we can make that vehicle metaverse ready. How do we make it possible to deliver really consistent quality of experience for people? So in the past, when we deal with the internet and we're browsing websites, we get sort of best effort user experiences. The user makes a request, the website tries to load, it gets there when it gets there, the user may or may not be still there when it gets there, and we move forward. When you're dealing with a stateless experience like that, that's fine. But when you get into the idea of a metaverse being a stateful, always on, always active, persistent experience or concept, then the quality of the best effort experience isn't good enough. And so here we have to start looking at how do we make it possible to create an optimum, consistent journey for the user when they go into an application, a metaverse experience, and start interacting with others. So we focus in on, you know, bandwidth, latency, jitter, and density. Those are really 4 big areas. And then in general, that in aggregate allows us to focus in on reliability and quality of experience. So a lot of people think that 5G is just about bandwidth. If you ask 100 people what's the top 3 reasons that 5G exists, the only answer they're going to give you is bandwidth, and then bandwidth, and then bandwidth. Maybe they might say upstream bandwidth and downstream bandwidth and total bandwidth, but they don't really have any other perspective. And so part of this journey has been to understand that and to communicate to people the value of other aspects of where we can improve. So Deutsche Telekom, we started working with other partners like Ericsson and Nokia to evolve global standards, new standards that can enable us to create this more consistent quality experience. So there's without getting overly technical, there's an IETF standard called L4S We implemented as managed latency with L4S. And the basic idea of L4S, very simplistic, is when I ask for data to come from a server somewhere across the internet, and that data is coming through a radio tower to my mobile phone, I don't know anything about the condition of the network. My application just gets the data when it gets it. That's the best effort experience. But when I utilize this new standard, the piece of software that sits in the radio that tries to fairly distribute the bandwidth of the network connection to all of the people that are connected to the radio at a given time. So everybody gets a fair shake at getting their data in an efficient and time-sensitive manner. It's called a scheduler. And the scheduler looks at what's going on inside and says, you know what, I'm filling up with data and I'm not able to push it out fast enough. I'm getting congested. And when it gets congested, it's able to take the packets of data that are being queued up for delivery but aren't getting there on time and mark them with a little bit that says that this packet of data was in a congested state. And so it didn't get to you on its time that it was supposed to be. And so what this simplistically allows you to do is you can build an application that can look at the packets of data that are coming from a video stream or an audio stream or whatever, and understand the network condition and actually react to it. So if we start computing that, 50% of the packets of data that are coming through are marked with congestion, then we know that we're asking the network to do more than it can. And that means that our quality of experience is going to be less than desirable for the user. It means we're going to have to drop frames of video because we didn't get the packets for the frame in time. It means that the audio might get choppy and actually you might even have dropouts. So to address this, the application now can go and change what the server's doing flow control. Just like a thermostat controls a heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, HVAC. And so in this model, we can go back to the server and say, you know what, I'm pulling this video stream at 5 megabits per second, but I'm not getting the data fast enough. So let's drop it to 2.5. And then we can continuously check the packets and look to see if they're still being marked congested or not. So we can look for an algorithmic way to create an optimum user experience. And so it's better to get a lower quality frame of video than to drop it, right? It's better to reduce the sampling rate of audio than to drop it. And there are other things you can do besides that. That's a simplistic example that's really focused on bandwidth, but there are other aspects to this. So this radio standard is like one of the, in the core of the network, but not as a Deutsche Telekom only thing. We're helping to co-invent it, but literally it's going to be a global standard over the next 2 years. We'll roll it out early. We'll look at ways that we can optimize the network for different classes of applications utilizing that technology. And we're even working with partners like NVIDIA and others to integrate L4S support into their core technology so that when we build applications on top of them, we're giving the user the most optimum, highest quality of experience we possibly can. And since most of those technology partners are focused on, remote rendering, AR, VR use cases, or things that are going to be immersive user experiences in the metaverse experience, then it really matters. So that's the core. Then we work up from there, and then we start looking at the frameworks. Unity, Unreal Engine, Niantic Lightship, Qualcomm Snapdragon Spaces, NVIDIA Omniverse and Cloud XR. All of these things that a lot of the application developers that are building metaverse experiences are sitting on top of, right? There's stacks that's, on top of those foundations. And we want to optimize and test and improve the network. So we're doing labs where we're working with these partners and others who are building applications on those tech stacks to test, to try out hypotheses, to push the envelope and find ways that we can optimize the network experience for everybody. And even working like Apple has integrated in iOS 16, they now have L4S support in the release version of iOS 16. So that means that we can start to showcase to developers how to take advantage of that in Swift and in Unity projects. And we're working on projects like that now.
Yeah.
That's quite impressive.
Yeah.
It's exciting because it's hard work and it's kind of nerdy and nerdy, but it's an inside out impact that can really change the game for people. And we've demonstrated this at like Mobile World Congress earlier this year. We showed remote rendering a video game and with a boat racing game. And it's just dramatically different when there's any kind of interruption of the flow on the network because of congestion. You see that kind of the boat jerks around like this, and it doesn't feel comfortable and it's not enjoyable, right? And then when you start putting this kind of flow control mechanism in there and you're intelligently working with the network, it's a game changer. I mean, it really, really is. So we're not a stupid pipe. We're a very smart pipe. And that's the big transformation that I've been trying to focus in on is, to change people's perspective of telcos as big, dumb pipes. And, we're trying to be really intelligent pipes that you have to work smartly with.
Exciting.
Now Dan is confused. So many technical details.
Yeah, I'm just recapping in my brain. That was interesting. So you talked about the foundations,
right?
And you're working on the network, but there are some established foundations already.
Correct. There's some technical standards that we can work with, and then there's also the biggest problem, though, is the interoperability and open standards. So, there's silo standards, right? Unity has their way of doing things and their way of doing networking, and then, Epic with Unreal Engine has a different way of doing things. But when it gets to also like dealing with devices, right? So when you're trying to build something as a software developer, you don't want to build it, uniquely for every single head-worn device that ever comes out. It's not ideal. It's the world that we have been living in for the last 10 years. Nobody likes it,
Exactly.
And so this led us into doing this partnering activity with Qualcomm around Snapdragon Spaces so that we can start to deploy one time in the software stack and hit all the devices that can support that. And that also sits on top of OpenXR. So it's taking advantage of that standard, that industry benefit, just as others are doing that. Even Meta with the Quest has adopted OpenXR underneath the hood. But the bigger thing is, in a journey I started last October, was the work on building industry consensus around emerging standards that have to be developed and created to allow for freely moving around in the metaverse with a capital M, being able to move from one place to another freely. The same way that we can today go from one web page to another with a link and a standardized URL. So this journey started with a set of plenaries of discussions that we did called Meta Traversal. And then more recently this year, it's been involved as the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is headed up by the Kronos Group president, Neil Trevett, and now has like 2,000 members just in the last 4 months. Almost everybody in the industry has signed up to be part of that because it will act as an umbrella organization to create consensus across all the standards organizations and all the key silo players that, these things matter. We drove the storyline being that we have to think people first. That's the entire concept of the decentralized web. It's people first, not companies first. And even in that context, you can still make a business and you can still grow a company, but you think differently about the way you design software, the way that you specify standards for software. And so the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is available at metaverse-standards.org, is really focusing on these customer or user-centric, user-first topics like 3D assets and customer and avatars and customer identity and privacy. And this is going to be the key to enabling us to have what we really want, which is this ability to just literally, glide our way through a whole bunch of different metaverse experiences rather than feeling that we have to go and aggregate ourselves into one player's version of that, right? So, and there's people who really don't want to be just living in one place. I mean, there's some that would stay in a Disney metaverse all day long and be totally happy, but most people want to be able to go in and out.
Exactly.
And so that's part of what I'm really focusing on as well, is enabling the developers on the technical side to reach the widest possible audience with their engineering work, supporting initiatives like we're doing with Qualcomm on Snapdragon Spaces, but then also, trying to drive consensus and vision around the value of these open standards and the value of interoperability and how it benefits not just the user, but also the companies that it's a complete inversion of what has been the Web 2 thinking model, right? Which has always been the other way around. We're grabbing your data, we're going to figure it out, we're going to make a business out of that. Now it's going to be the other way around.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Just on the terminology, I love what you said about, I made a note here, a metaverse and the metaverse.
Right.
Like you say, the metaverse should be all the worlds interoperating.
Yeah, it's a,
So
it's a collective concept.
Yeah. So shouldn't we have a separate name? Like we have the internet,
Yeah.
and then we have websites, and we have
Yeah.
applications.
Yeah.
We don't have different internets. Like
Yeah,
Facebook is not an
Yeah.
internet. YouTube
Yep.
is not an internet. So
Yeah. You're totally right. It's, I've grown up with the computer industry. I've rarely seen such a bad destruction of language. Yeah, it's a problem. We're gonna, but you know what? It'll fix itself, because organically users will tell us what it's called. And it's interesting because you have the same problem with augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, extended reality. I think that'll get changed too. I mean, right now I just kind of work with the umbrella XR, but it's also been called ambient computing, spatial computing, right? So what is it, right? And I think customers will find a word or a phrase that resonates with them, and organically that'll be what we call it. Because actually it wasn't called the internet.
exactly.
Originally, it was called the World Wide Web, the
Yes.
www. It was called Mosaic. It was called the ARPANET. It had all kinds of different things. I mean, I was online in 1979 before there was an internet. We used dial-up. We connected to mainframes that were run by CompuServe, or a Delphi in Boston with a Data General, computer, or a VAX. So it was totally, there's been so much evolution. I don't worry too much or stress out too much about, what it's going to be called, as long as we're really clear with today's definition, so that we have a clarity for people about what we mean when we say, I had the same problem when I joined, by the way, with Deutsche Telekom, with the word smart glass versus AR glasses. It was killer, because I had to clarify that a smart glass is simply a display that's projecting an image in front of your eye. It doesn't have any sense of the real world. There's no spatial tracking. There's no localization. But that became hard to explain to people, because those concepts were still new to a lot of people. SLAM was a new concept for a lot of people. And so it's a constant journey. I feel that it's very important, though, to accept that has to happen, and that part of your communication needs to include clarity in the definitions of things, so you avoid getting traction, engagement from people, because they're like, I don't know what this is. And it's interesting also to point out that Meta, as we all know, is going to make the release of the next Quest on October 11th, right? And we know that the device has very high quality color pass-through camera on it. Right. So everybody sees what they've been building as virtual reality headsets. But when you bring high fidelity color pass-through camera into the display experience, now it can be just as functional as an AR device as it is as a VR device. And in fact, if you look at the journey that developers have taken with the pass-through API on the Quest platform, you can see the adoption rate of going from just using it so that you can find your beer and your controller, and making sure you don't fall off your couch, or you can find your keyboard on your desk, to holy crap, we can do all kinds of amazing stuff. We can start mapping the scene out. We can start anchoring stuff against where the room walls really are. It becomes a lot more of a hybrid. So now the question is this device going to come to the market and everybody's going to call it an XR device? Because it can merge both AR and VR user experiences. And in fact, I think a lot of VR developers will start adding AR as a feature kind of stuff to their user experiences, and kind of leaning in that direction. But I think at some point they're going to be like, well, why don't we just do all AR applications? We don't need to do anything with, because VR, AR, VR, it's like, maybe I don't need to use, maybe it's a better experience if I use the user's real environment and anchor content against a real wall, rather than put it in a virtual space that is not personal. And I think the desire for personalization and it will really drive a lot of that. People want to make it their own. They want their own virtual spaces, but they also would love to take advantage of their real world spaces, even replicate them in a digital context. And that personalization drive is what drives the use of Snapchat. Why it's the #1 AR platform in the world, because it's about me personalizing and creating content. And they don't call it AR, right? They don't get lost in the terms.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So like you say, the users are going to decide the terms. Like the makers, we can suggest the terms, but if they don't adopt it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to some of the many science fiction books I've read. Maybe it will be called a blurt, right? They were looking at, was it with George Orwell or whatever? Some of the books in the past, they come up with, special words, right? They have double speak kind of words. I mean, I think ultimately we'll find our own definitions for these things as they mature.
Exactly. Now you mentioned these glasses. So what is your feeling when we can get rid of mobile phones? You don't have to carry any more mobile phones and we have something else, not maybe glasses, but something else.
So in 2018, I started drafting a LinkedIn article called the de-evolution of the smartphone. And I was, using history to sort of talk about how the smartphone came as an aggregation of devices and technologies. And then we're going to deconstruct it over time into a set of devices again. And I still want to publish it. I just keep holding off because the tech's not advancing as aggressively as perhaps I'd like. But if you look at Apple's journey, I use it as a good proxy. So we've got, a watch, which actually I'm charging right now, but the watch is an interaction device that has more versatility than people realize. Even today, in terms of developer stuff, there's, in iOS 15 or watchOS 8, they made it so you could do an interaction like this to make a selection. You could do this to make a rotation. And that applies to a watch, was designed as an accessibility function for people maybe who don't have another hand. But that could mean that the watch could be a controller for a device application that's connected through a phone. And so, or elsewhere, right? And I've actually worked with devices where the band, is tracking my muscles and electrical stimulation of my fingers, and then allowing me to interact with 2D applications, flicking through slides in a PowerPoint by just doing this with my finger. No hand tracking, no, device-based hand tracking, right? It's just off the wrist. So hand as an interaction device without requiring the field of view of a hand tracking system is clearly the next phase, I think, for that. We've got eye tracking coming on devices. We already had it on the HP Reverb G2 Omnicept, and we'll have it on the next device from Meta. There's some concerns about the privacy issues with eye tracking that Avi Barzev has written really well about. But functionally, if we do it right, this starts leaning into multimodal interaction models, which become very compelling. I want to be able to point at the object in the real world and say, make that magenta, and it's able to actually compute where that desk is, and then actually draw a magenta overlay on top of it. Right? And that's the kind of multimodal interaction that I want. So the missing piece there is AI. So we have really not tapped the full value of AI functions to really leverage and enable that kind of user experience. And I think that's going to be the required to make the transition from mobile phones to all-day wearables. Because in order for us to have an all-day wearable, even a simple one, let's say we take a Ray-Ban Stories device and we put a simple display on it, like a smart glass display, right? So we just have some information and I call it information at your eye tips. That device needs to be able to deliver 1 to 3 discrete pieces of data as a moment-to-moment experience throughout the flow of your day. And that flow of data needs to be based on your context, on your personalization, on your history of what's interesting and important to you, right? Not here's all the information, then I have to pick it, but smart. It has to be intelligent. It has to know, hey, you're driving in a car, you're on your way to an appointment, you're walking inside of a building to a destination, you're going to get your lunch and pick up your Starbucks coffee or whatever, right? So I think that's really going to be a key piece. I think the devices breaking apart, so spatial audio with the AirPods, the watch as an interaction device, the phone as a connectivity, compute, and maybe battery. and then a display and sensors, right? Sensors are the key because the sensors need to allow the human body to become a multimodal input and output. And so it's the combination of all these things that make the immersive metaverse experience possible on a head-worn device. So the lightweight all-day wearable still needs to have that AI layer that is basically a set of deconstructed services that work together intelligently, not app-based. So we have to stop building monolithic apps like we do for mobile phones, and we have to build services with very specific points of view. When I joined Deutsche Telekom, I started studying microservices because I wanted to really understand what that model of development looks like. How do you scale and build? Uber is an application built on I think 2,000 plus microservices. So it's a complete different way of thinking about developing software. Even though in their world, it's a monolithic app from the user point of view, it could be completely deconstructed. And those services could be made exposed in very discrete ways. So I think that for the lightweight all-day wearable, which will probably be the journey that we start over the next couple of years, that's where AI deployment will start to become more utilized, but the maturity will come when we start really leaning into semantical scene understanding with 6DoF capable XR devices, where I can hybridize the virtual content, perfectly fit it with the real world environment, intelligently place content, because it's cool that I can grab a digital object and snap it to the wall in my house, but I don't want to have to do that all the time. Just put it where it makes sense for you, for me. And then if I need to tweak it, okay, fine. But don't make me do all the work like I'm hand building the house. That's So I think that's the next level of maturity that we have to go through with AI. But I think the other problem I wouldn't say problem, but the other reason why phones themselves won't be completely removed is because the phone manufacturers don't want to get out of business on them. And so they're going to design them as sort of a center point for this ecosystem for a variety of reasons, practical and some not necessary. I do think that there will be a transition to first wirelessly connected headsets that connect from this display system directly to a phone, in a 1 meter window of distance. All the devices that I've talked about will be within the meter of the body. And they'll probably get intelligent and start leveraging edge functions off of either a computer, a PlayStation 5, or router with GPU and CPU in it, and start to build the edge infrastructure in the home and tap that. But eventually, I think you'll see acceptance of having 5G or 6G or whatever, but 5G new radio, as it's called, or RedCap devices, right? So it's maybe not going to be the highly immersive 6DoF device. It's not going to be a Quest, but maybe say something like a Ray-Ban Stories or an Echo Frames with a display integrated into it as an all-day wearable, but that it's connected not through Bluetooth, but through cellular radio direct. And then it doesn't need a phone. And I think that's going to come, I'd say 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, quite soon.
Yeah.
I was expecting maybe end of 2020, 2029.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, not that long. Yeah, I mean, there's so many smart people working on the problems that need to be solved. The display optics platforms have evolved massively in the last 3 years. There's so much really cool stuff. Some of it's been taking a decade, 15 years to come to fruition, but the acceleration of maturing it to a commercial standpoint has been massive the last 3 years. I think the impact of Meta bringing the level of camera pass-through that we had on the Varjo headset to a more cost-effective business customer or prosumer user will have dramatic impact on all of the other manufacturers of VR headsets. I think by the end of next year, nobody will be making a VR headset that doesn't have pass-through camera on it. It wouldn't make sense, I think, to do that, because the expectation level of, it's like the transition we went through with 3DoF to 6DoF VR, right? Nobody wanted to make a 3DoF device because people want to be able to get out of their chair and move around and have it matter, right? And so that I think that journey, will happen very quickly with the introduction of the next Meta device.
Yeah.
All right, so cool. I could listen to you talk all day.
Yeah, I know we're probably out of time, huh?
Yeah, I was going to say, I still have 2 questions that I want to
Sure.
ask.
And I'll give you short answers to it.
I want to wrap up. Also, this is so cool. Like, I've never felt so dumb, but also so enlightened at the same time. So thank you for sharing. Okay, well, first, let me go back to what you said last, which is because you mentioned, so we have these separate pieces, and the thing that's required to connect them is the next level AI.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's what we're missing.
I think it's a huge missed opportunity so far.
Sure, but then what I'm wondering is, like in those old movies, you have, like, I don't know, Aliens or 2001 even. They have all this world-conquering technology, but they still have 1970s keyboards and PCs with the big monitors.
Right.
I'm wondering, similarly, to get to the level of AI that you're talking about, which is able to recognize even what you're doing visually.
Yeah.
To recognize and identify and label correctly what you're doing.
Right.
By the time that AI comes, wouldn't we already be, the hardware, wouldn't that already be like in contact lens, for example, or even neural inside the brain devices?
So practically speaking, I do believe that contact lens developers like Mojo Vision are very intelligently thinking about, what do we do when we're eye tracking? How do we relate eye tracking to the real world and to intelligently display the right kind of information in the right place? That's another part of it, right? Because the way that they're rendering that, they have to make sure they're not obscuring important things. So it's got to be done very, very intelligently. I do think they're going to push that envelope very much so. I would say to you that the fact that we have multimodal input capable devices is going to very rapidly drive the adoption of intelligently understanding what the user's doing. And we do that by not only semantically parsing the scene, but we semantically parse what the user's saying. We start to recognize mannerisms and gestures of hand. There's lots of work already done in that space. If you ask most people what AI is, they're going to say computer vision and machine learning, right? And that's about all they know of AI, and robotics maybe. But the reality is that AI is a descriptive term that describes like 50 plus subfields of reasoning technologies, right? And I think fundamentally we start with advancing on things like domain expertise, taking the knowledge of a person and compartmentalizing that and codifying that so that we can scale it. AI allows us to scale a human being. We cannot scale ourselves, practically speaking, other than doing one-to-many presentations. We cannot do many-to-many presentations as a human being, right? I can only have one conversation at a time. But if I could take my intelligence and my domain expertise about a topic and make that available, and we see that with customer service, troubleshooting systems, chatbots today, but imagine taking the very specific knowledge of myself and turning it into something that you can access. That will be the next journey with domain expertise, because we have a problem that we have to address, which is the aging out of people's expertise on topics and experiences that are just not being trained, to the next generation. So that knowledge gets lost and it doesn't get usable. But also the issue of making it globally accessible and scaling that person's value is important. But also even just scaling the who I am part. I'm very interested in being able to create a simulacrum of myself that you can have a conversation with when I'm not around. I'm exploring some interesting journeys that I want to show next year, where I can demonstrate with today's technology how possible it is to do that. Very quickly, I also tell you to focus on what's happening with large language models. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that people are doing with DALL-E, which is an image generation tool. But think about the idea that you start intertwining all of these really interesting technical advancements that people are doing and building a pipeline of experience. So because of time, I won't get into the details of it, but I would say a simple example might be if I use some AI to do scene recognition and to create a caption for a photograph, a lady with a dog carrying a parasol walking on a beach midday. And that's the caption that's generated by AI, machine learning processing an image. And then I take that text and I pump it into a system that can then generate an image. I could literally clone an image, and it's like a whole nother type of style transfer. So if I can imagine that I wanted to take my home, scan it with something like room plan, get the geometry of it, and then say, make it look like I'm on Mars, then I have a Martian house that I've made from my real world home. And then I can push that into a metaverse experience to open standards and experience that and share it with others. So there's some really quick stuff that, procedurally generated metaverse experiences that are driven from real world content is going to be a huge accelerator, because the development costs of building brand new assets was one of the biggest blockers for VR. It cost so much money to make a 3D asset that was optimum enough to run in a VR headset that people didn't do it for fun. They did it for work. They did it for business. They did it for a game, but they didn't do it just because they could whip it out like this. And I think that is where we're headed in the very short term over the next year. And that's going to really blow people's mind when they start seeing that the power of those other types of uses of AI technologies.
Okay. All right. So I think you're going to enjoy this one. I'd like to ask something philosophical. The very first thing you said, I hope I'm quoting you correctly. The very first thing you said was you enjoy working with new emerging technologies to improve human communication. I believe
Correct.
That's what you said. Okay. Okay. Then my question is, do you think it's possible for that curve to peak, or will it just go forever? Meaning, is it possible for human communication to have already been at its most efficient? Is it possible that we overdo it, meaning these new metaverse technologies separate people rather than bring people together, for example?
So it's possible for us to have that dystopian result, but I think that naturally people will be a little bit more mindful. There's a ton of opportunities. Look, simple real-time language translation in a metaverse experience, like as a universal standard. If we could just simply, we have all that tech. It sits today in many instances of it. But if I could just build any metaverse experience and then guarantee that regardless of your native language, we can have a free-flowing conversation, that's a huge game changer, right?
That would change the whole school system, basically. Like, why you study different languages in the school
Changes
if you
everything.
can?
Yeah. Might lead to more loss of language, unique languages, or might lead to just more cultural understanding, more comfort, more sense of equality and presence with each other, maybe a more emotional and positive connection between people who don't feel comfortable because they don't understand each other's languages. So I think that's a simple example.
Okay, that proves that we
really
haven't
meaningful.
Peaked. That proves we haven't peaked yet, because I would argue that is better than where we are today.
Correct.
Is it possible that there is a peak, or is it going to be continuous improvement?
I think where we've peaked a bit is on the noisy social media ecosystem. And so, what's a bit problematic for me is when I started with the internet, it was all about the quality of the signal to noise ratio. Websites were meaningful, yes. Content was meaningful, and now it's completely the other way around. And I get frustrated with search engines. When I go into a platform like LinkedIn, which is mostly supposed to be meaningful content, have a very high signal to noise ratio, and it feels like I'm still trying to search YouTube for videos again. And I can't really create any kind of tangible longevity in the value of the information flow. I think that creates an opportunity for me to be able to go into, say, unroll a Facebook feed and find the meaningful information about a person's life and then turn that into something that you can re-experience. Basically get to know who that person was. You could tap the value of the timeline of their experiences and even codify that into something that you could have a conversation with, that you could make queries of. You could learn more about family members or friends or people you went to high school with that are no longer alive or whatever. I think there's a lot of value still to take these noisy fire hoses. Literally, Twitter used to call their API fire hose. Because that's how right? It was like to take those platforms like Snap, Twitter, Instagram, and to mine them for meaningful information, to find the real highlights.
Okay.
I don't think we, by any stretch of the imagination, tapped what's possible with human communication. But what we need to do is democratic experience.
Okay, Terry, this has been truly enlightening. So thank you so much for giving us
My pleasure.
time.
I appreciate the opportunity.
And,
great questions.
Well, we got to do this again.
I have still one.
Okay, go on, Matthias.
Like Terry has these beautiful colors in the background and also this nice blue shirt. So what's the story of this shirt?
So I work as a mentor at Hubrum. So Hubrum is Deutsche Telekom's technology incubator. We work with startup companies. We do programs around different technology topics, explore and accelerate the startups in those topics. Currently, we're working with Qualcomm and T-Mobile US together, doing a program around Qualcomm Snapdragon Spaces technology, which will actually be showcasing in the later part of November, the outcome of that program. And we've done programs in the past with Apple. We've done programs focused on edge computing, 5G, XR. I'm trying to get an AI one going. And we also, through Hubrum, we do investment or we work with these startups to help find business relationships within or outside of Deutsche Telekom. So it's more than just a technology exploration, but a more holistic approach. And so I love mentoring and sharing what I can and trying to inspire and support the startup companies that go through programs. And I've been doing that since 2017, really having a good time. The background is actually a corporate video loop that I repurposed. But actually what I want to do is make that a real-time 3D toy. I want to start using some tools to do that with Zoom, but unfortunately the APIs aren't there yet. So I'm working on some tricks to make that happen.
Awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. And you have to come back next year to tell us about your many-to-many communication.
So I will say I'm working on showcasing that at the AWE conference next year. I already have a slot scheduled with them for that. That's my target.
Maybe
in the USA.
There.
Yeah, in the USA. Yeah.
Okay.
I need the time. I wanted to do it for the EU event, but I need more time. I've been on the road too much.